It's funny how a single photograph can hold a whole lifetime of dreams. For me, it was a faded picture of my grandmother, Eleanor, standing in front of a small, charming old house with a promise whispered in her eyes. I, Clara Sterling, always saw my future in that house. I believed I had a key to a different life, one built on my own terms, thanks to the trust fund she lovingly set up for me. But as I've learned, a key doesn't matter if someone changes the lock. The very people who should have protected my dreams instead used them to finance my sister's lavish life, assuming I would just stay quiet. They were wrong. Before I dive into my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you'd consider subscribing to my channel, it would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Clara Sterling, and my story began not with a grand discovery, but with the quiet, unsettling feeling that something I had always believed in was no longer there. For as long as I could remember, my future had a name, Eleanor. My grandmother, Eleanor Sterling, was a woman of quiet strength and profound integrity. She had built her life from the ground up, starting with a small ceramics shop that eventually blossomed into a thriving import-export business. Her success was never loud or flashy. It was the result of a steadfast belief in hard work and a deep-seated respect for her word, her legacy. A significant trust fund set aside specifically for my education and career was, to me, a sacred pact. It was my key to a life I would build on my own terms. I was a designer, and the money was meant for my own firm, the culmination of a decade of hard work and dreaming. I had meticulously planned every detail, from the business model to the first-year projections. It was all a testament to her teachings. My parents, on the other hand, had a different relationship with success. They were born into it, heirs to an established real estate empire. They moved through their world with an effortless grace that I had always admired from a distance, yet never felt fully a part of. It was a world of country club memberships, annual galas, and an unspoken competition of who could project the most perfect image of a perfect family. My sister Chloe was the undisputed star of their show. She was the golden child, the one who effortlessly absorbed all the light in the room. And my parents' pride in her was a tangible, almost physical thing. My role, the quiet, bookish one, was the sensible daughter, the one who didn't need their constant attention or financial bailouts. I had sent an email to my parents, who were the co-trustees, to begin the process of accessing the funds, but their responses were a series of polite evasions and vague promises. They were too busy, they said, and the bank was being difficult. I tried to dismiss the unease, but it clung to me like a shadow. I told myself it was just a temporary hurdle, a minor inconvenience before I could begin the next great chapter of my life. I was wrong. The first sign that my path was not just blocked, but actively being dismantled, came during a charity gala my parents hosted. The event was a glittering affair, a sea of silk and tailored suits, a world my parents inhabited with an effortless grace that I had always admired from a distance. I, however, felt like a guest in their kingdom, a visitor in a place I was genetically tied to but emotionally distant from. The air hummed with the superficial chatter of people who knew each other's net worth more than their hearts. My sister Chloe glided across the ballroom, a whirlwind of confident smiles and designer fabric. I watched her from a distance, nursing a glass of sparkling water, when my breath caught in my throat. Around Chloe's neck was a diamond necklace that shimmered under the lights. It was not just beautiful, it was extraordinarily expensive. The kind of jewelry you don't just happen to own. Chloe, for all her popularity and social media presence as an aspiring lifestyle influencer, worked a career that brought in small partnerships, not seven-figure sponsorships. When she noticed me looking, she gave a hurried smile and a vague comment about it being a special gift. Before turning away, the knot in my stomach tightened. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my parents had bought it for her. I excused myself and called my mother from a quiet corridor. Her voice was strained, a thin wire stretched to its breaking point. And she ended the call abruptly, leaving me standing there with the muffled sounds of the party fading into the cold silence of my own thoughts. The disconnect was stark and brutal. They were celebrating a life of opulence bought with stolen dreams, and I was the ghost in the machine, watching it all with a sick feeling of dread. A week later, a letter arrived from the bank. It was formal, cold, and a slap to the face. It stated that my trust fund was pending review due to unauthorized disbursements and was temporarily frozen. The phrase unauthorized disbursements echoed in my mind. It was a sterile, impersonal term for a deeply personal betrayal. I felt the paper tremble in my hands, a tangible manifestation of the foundation crumbling beneath me. I called my parents immediately. My father's voice was a mask of feigned calm. "A clerical error," he insisted, his tone smooth and condescending. "The bank is a mess, Clara. Don't worry about it. We'll handle it." But his words felt hollow, like a stage set with no real substance behind it. The trust that had been the bedrock of my relationship with my parents began to crack. My mind raced, piecing together the events of the past few months, the hushed phone calls, the hurried exits, the sudden, extravagant gifts to Chloe, and it all pointed to one conclusion: they had taken it. All of it. The betrayal was not a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, calculated act. I flew to Connecticut the next morning. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and impending frost. I did not go to my parents' home. The thought of stepping into that gilded cage of lies made my skin crawl. Instead, I went directly to the bank. Mr. Harrison, the senior trust manager, was a kind elderly man who had worked with my grandmother for decades. He greeted me with a somber look that told me more than my parents' entire charade. He led me to his office and, with a sigh, pulled out a large, heavy folder. "I wish this were a clerical error." "Clara," he said softly, his voice full of a genuine sorrow that broke through my defenses. He laid the file on his desk, its pages filled with financial statements, signatures, and legal documents I barely understood. He pointed to a series of withdrawals that had drained my account by nearly 80%, next to each transaction. He showed me a signature, my father's, and a small handwritten note. The note read, "Funding for the Chloe Project." My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt a hot, sickening wave wash over me. I wasn't a financial genius, but the meaning of those two words was perfectly clear. The Chloe Project was not a business venture. It was a blank check for my sister's extravagant life. The new car, the endless shopping sprees, the diamond necklace. It was a project of indulgence, paid for with the inheritance my grandmother had so carefully set aside for my future. I looked at the signatures again, seeing not just ink on a page, but a deliberate act of betrayal. My parents had looked me in the eye and lied. They had taken my dreams and used them to fuel my sister's insatiable appetites. The audacity of it, the sheer entitlement, was breathtaking. They hadn't just used my money. They had used it for the one person in our family who had never been taught the value of a single dollar. I left the bank feeling empty, the world around me a blur of cold, gray facades. My own strength, the very thing they had praised, was what they had used against me. That evening, I invited my parents and Chloe to dinner at a quiet restaurant in town, the same one where my grandmother used to take me for our little celebrations. It was a place that held a lifetime of warm memories, hot cocoa in the winter, the smell of fresh bread, her stories of building her business from nothing. I didn't mention the purpose of the dinner, letting them assume it was a regular family get-together. They arrived, all smiles and pretense, my mother, with her impeccably coiffed hair, and my father, with his charming patriarch of the year demeanor. Chloe was there, glowing, her laugh a little too loud. The air was thick with the silent lie we were all living. We ordered, and they began to talk about Chloe, their favorite topic, the latest brand deal, the new apartment they'd helped her secure. They spoke as if her life was a collaborative project, one they were all so proud of, a project that conveniently had no budget and no consequences. My father even went so far as to say, "Chloe is just so talented. We had to help her realize her potential. It's what any good parents would do." When they were finished, A silence settled over the table. I took a deep breath. "I went to the bank today," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. My mother's hand froze midair, clutching her fork. My father's smile vanished. "I saw the paperwork," I continued, my eyes fixed on my father. The signed documents, the withdrawals, and the note, the Chloe project. The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. My father's face went pale. He tried to speak, but no words came out. My mother's eyes darted from me to him. "Clara, honey, it's not what you think," she began, her voice a strained whisper. My father found his voice. "We did it for her. Clara, she needed it. You've always been so independent, so strong. You didn't need that money. She did." His words were a knife twisting in the wound. They were not an apology, they were an accusation. They had taken from me not out of necessity, but out of a perverse sense of entitlement, believing my strength was a reason to take what was mine. Their logic was as twisted as it was cruel. I took a manila envelope from my purse and placed it on the table. Inside were the photocopies of the bank statements, the notes, and a copy of the trust fund agreement. My father's face, which had been a mask of indignation, crumpled. "If you do this, Clara, you're on your own," he threatened, his voice low and full of venom. "You will no longer be a part of this family." I met his gaze, my own eyes not wavering. I didn't say a word. Instead, I took my phone out of my pocket and played a video. It was an old recording of my grandmother, her voice raspy and kind, but firm. "My darling Clara," she said, looking straight into the camera. "Remember this, my legacy is not in money. It is in integrity. Never let anyone take that from you, not even the people you love. Stand firm in who you are, and you will always have what truly matters." The video ended. I put the phone down on the table, took my purse, and walked out, leaving the stunned silence of my family behind me. I did not look back. The next few days were a blur of lawyers, phone calls, and text messages from my parents that fluctuated between pleading and veiled threats. I read them all, but I did not reply. The legal process, initiated by Meister, Harrison, and the bank's legal department, began to move forward. The bank was suing my parents for the unauthorized use of the funds, citing the exact clause in my grandmother's trust agreement that stated the money was to be used solely for my career and education. It was a clause they had clearly ignored, or assumed no one would ever enforce. The legal battle was long and emotionally exhausting, but I remained steadfast. My resolve was not rooted in vengeance, but in a deep-seated belief in justice, the very value my grandmother had taught me. I no longer cared about their acceptance. I cared about my dignity. Every deposition, every meeting with my lawyer felt like a step towards reclaiming not just the money, but my own narrative. My parents had tried to erase my story, but I was rewriting it, one legal document at a time. News of the lawsuit eventually leaked. My parents' reputation in their social circles was shattered. They were forced to sell the home that my grandmother had left them, a house that held so many memories of her warmth and wisdom, to repay the money they had taken. The irony was not lost on me. Chloe, in a desperate attempt to salvage her public image, gave an interview on a local news channel. She sat there, her perfectly made-up face streaked with fake tears, blaming me. "I don't know why she's doing this," she said, her voice a dramatic sob. "She's trying to ruin our family. I just want to know why she would do this, just to get attention." The reporter, a slick man with a microphone, just nodded sympathetically. The lies, the deflection, the complete absence of a single grain of responsibility was breathtaking. It was a betrayal far deeper than the money itself. It was a complete and utter denial of who I was, of my very existence as a person with my own rights and my own story. I didn't get angry. I just felt a profound sense of sadness. They were a family of illusions, and I was no longer a part of their mirage. The final court order was issued, and the full amount of my trust fund was returned to me. The weight of the legal battle lifted, but it left an emotional void. I had won, but the victory felt hollow. My parents, now living a much more modest life, sent me one last letter. It was a bitter, self-pitying tirade, a final act of a broken relationship. They told me that I had destroyed their family, that I was no longer their daughter. I read the words, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had not destroyed their family. They had I had simply refused to continue living in the ruin they had created. I did not respond. I did not call. I did not explain. With the money finally back in my hands, I began to build my company. The first few months were a whirlwind of blueprints, business plans, and late-night coffee. I didn't have my family's financial or emotional support, but I had something far more valuable: my own integrity. I hired my first employee, a young designer with a passion as fierce as my own. My clients saw my work, not my last name, and they trusted my vision. I found a new sense of community, a chosen family of colleagues and friends who believed in me for who I was, not for who my parents wanted me to be. I was building a life that was authentic, honest, and truly mine. Years passed, my company grew, and I became a respected name in the design world. I was walking through the city one afternoon when I received an unexpected phone call from Mr. Harrison. He was retiring, he said, and he had something he wanted to give me. We met at a coffee shop near my office. He handed me a small, sealed envelope. "Your grandmother left this with me years ago," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "She told me to give it to you and I felt you had found your way." I thanked him, and he left. I opened the envelope, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and old grief. Inside was a small, faded photograph of my grandmother and me, taken when I was a little girl. On the back, in her elegant, looping handwriting, were the words, "My dearest Clara, you will face hard choices. But remember, the true test of your character is not what you keep, but what you refuse to lose. I have always been proud of the woman you are becoming. Never let anyone, not even those you love most, tell you that you are not enough. You are more than enough. You are everything." I stood on the sidewalk, a sea of people rushing past me, and I read her words again. My eyes welled up with tears. They weren't tears of sadness or regret, but of profound gratitude. I had won the battle for my trust fund, but my grandmother had given me something far more valuable: a trust in myself. I had lost a family, but I had gained a life of authenticity and purpose. I was not a victim, but a survivor. I was not defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I had the courage to reclaim. The journey had been difficult, marked by loss and pain, but it had led me to a place of strength, freedom, and a peace that no amount of money could ever buy. I was finally home, not in a house, but in myself,